My guest today spent 12 years building one of the biggest AI companies in Silicon Valley, but then he walked away to become a game dev.
So before starting my game dev journey, I started a company called Ironclad. And at first it was just me and my co-founder, Jason. Jason was a lawyer. I was a software engineer. When I left, it was 600 employees, from 0 customers to 2,000.
But after building what most people dream of, he chose to start over. What do you think is harder, game dev or SaaS?
In terms of making money, I think game dev is way harder.
This is Kai Wangwilt, and his opinions challenge a lot of what game developers believe.
I don't think that this anti-AI stance is sustainable for the game industry. Players themselves just want to play a good game.
But this wasn't just a conversation about AI. This was a conversation about forging a new frontier. Because you mentioned just keeping the mindset of a beginner. What did you actually mean by that?
Really look at things not just from first principles, but also look for the advice from people like all of the wonderful guests you have on your podcast.
If you had one piece of advice for the indie dev listening, what would you say?
I think the thing that probably stops a lot more indie game developers is...
Kai, why do you think this anti-AI stance in the game dev community is not sustainable?
Yeah. Well, first, let me make it very clear that the game that I'm working on right now, Overtrick, does not use any AI whatsoever. It's 100% artisan, every line crafted by yours truly, every piece of music written by me, etc. But yeah, I don't think that this anti-AI stance is sustainable for the game industry. I think we've all had this kind of oh shit moment where we saw AI do something and we're a little bit scared of it, honestly. And I had that moment when I was working in legal technology, which I did for the better part of a decade. And I was working on something. Someone said, "Have you checked out this GPT-3 thing?" And I tried it out and realized that what I'd been working on, I just have to throw away completely. And weirdly, I feel by the time I left the legal industry, the lawyers had gone through all 7 stages of grief. The denial part was in the rearview mirror, and the conversation has shifted from, it's not responsible to use AI, kind of a witch hunt for all the lawyers who were using AI, to no, how do we responsibly use AI? And so you can imagine the surprise me coming from this traditionally backwards in terms of technology adoption industry of legal into the shiny new industry of game dev, and being why is the conversation in this very tech forward community 3 years behind the conversation that I just came out of in the legal community? I think if you just think about what the future could hold in terms of generative AI in game dev, I think it's clear that we're going to have to move in some way towards using this technology. Just imagine how much better games could be if, instead of focusing on the nitty gritty of the technology, we could instead focus on finding the fun and making and crafting these experiences to be even more mind-blowing and even more engaging and exciting.
Yeah, as we were kind of joking about pre-chat, we're ready to dive into the comment section, but people have a lot of passion around this topic, and we'll kind of dive into a little bit more of your journey as this conversation goes on, and why you are in a unique place to kind of speak to AI and game dev and in the company you're coming from and things like that. But just to stick here a little bit more, kind of just thinking about your understanding of AI, where do you think so much of that vitriol comes from now that you're kind of a part of the game dev community? As you mentioned, working on your game Overtrick, which we'll also talk about that too. So,
no, it definitely feels like in the game dev community, we're in sort of this collective stage of denial, and we will move past it, but we're very, very stuck here. And I think maybe the reason that we're so stuck here is because the game industry as a whole feels like it's going through a contraction. This I don't think is my theory, so I won't. It's just the one that resonates the most with me. I think during the pandemic, people started playing tons of games because you couldn't go outside and interact with your friends in a lot of places. And so I think this demand for games exploded, and I think the game industry expanded to try and meet that demand. But now we can go outside again. Now we can have face to face conversations with our friends and loved ones. And now we don't have to spend all day, every day indoors playing video games. And so I think that demand for video games is greater than it was pre pandemic because it introduced new audiences to this cool thing called video games, but also a little bit less than when we were all stuck inside as a collective world. Um, and so I think this contraction that's happening as a result of the pandemic, maybe other market forces at play as well, combined with this disruptive technology apparently doing work that many of us have spent so many years trying to get really good at, has created a lot of fear and kind of got us stuck into this kind of denial moment. Going back to the, going to talk probably about lawyers more than any of the other discussions you've had, but I feel like the legal industry hasn't had quite that contraction. And that's maybe allowed lawyers to be a little bit more open minded as to what their professions could look like with generative AI.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then also just, another question to kind of build up your sort of thinking as to just help me understand. Do you share any of the concerns when we talk about AI of environmental concerns or stolen intellectual data or and also AI is such a broad word, just what do you think of when I bring up those concerns that are often cited by in any industry, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think they are incredibly valid concerns. And I think they're concerns that we should be having intelligent discourse about. But I think the way that we solve those issues is not by kind of sticking our heads in the ground and ignoring that this technology is here. Like the cat's out of the bag. We're not going back to a pre generative AI world. And so I think the best way to do this is for us as a society to accept this technology, use it, understand it, and then have an intelligent conversation about how we're going to use it responsibly. I think the same thing is happening right now with mobile and social media. There are all these studies that now show how bad that it is for the development of young children. And I think we're seeing really intelligent discourse and some very good policies being put in place in schools to reduce the amount of screen time on mobile devices, to reduce or eliminate social media in the school system. So yeah, I think that we need that same sort of discourse, but I think in order to have that discourse, I think we as a society can't just ignore that this technology is here, and instead sort of need to embrace it first and then confront the challenges it brings with it together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I will certainly agree that the discourse is nothing but positive. I mean, it's such a life changing or, culture changing technology that the vitriol, I somewhat understand it. Like, I've been reflecting on this before we had this conversation, and AI, as I said once again, such a broad word. We're being told that it's impacting so many areas of our life. Like, as an example, I'm on the job search right now, and it's pretty rough out there. And so it's hard to know, like, is AI filtering out my resumes and all these negative experiences? And so I think I understand the dev or the gamer that also wants to protect their thing. But I also think it's such a valuable tool that it's maybe a little bit, like you said, like not the best option to just put your head in the sand. And so yeah, I'm interested in having more conversations like this to hear other perspectives and I would say for me, my the jury's still out on how we effectively utilize AI, whether or not we use the generative pieces, defining what we mean by that. So yeah, I'm excited to chat more about it and excited to have someone with a little bit of a different experience coming in, like you said. So I'm also wondering where you think AI is going. Like you said, you feel that it's a few years behind other industries. Where do you think AI is going in, let's say, the next 5 years for the game dev industry?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that we are coming to, as a game dev industry, coming towards that acceptance stage. Um, and I think we're, I think there were reports about how the most recent Steam Next Fest had a large number of very reputable looking games that had the disclosure about AI content in them. And I think this is a sign that people are starting to realize that maybe even though as a game dev community, we are anti AI, players themselves just want to play a good game. Like there's a lot of AI slop there. No one wants to play that. But like if you use some AI to craft an incredible experience, um, then absolutely people want to experience that. So yeah, I think, over the next 5 years, we're going to start to see that AI is just a tool. It's a multiplicative tool. It is very disruptive because it changes the way that we have to work on things. But I think we're going to see better games come out of studios that adopt and indie developers that adopt AI, but not in a kind of like push more slop out way, but in a way where they use it to really multiply their innate abilities in their craft. I also don't think
Yeah,
it's going to be like eliminating role of like artistic directors and software engineers and game software engineers and things like that. It really is multiplicative. If you take a really good software engineer, you can multiply how much amazing stuff they can do. If you take an incredible artist, you can multiply how much of their vision they can realize. But if you take an amateur artist, I've experimented in game jams with Gen AI, and I would call myself a mediocre artist. And when I use generative AI to produce art assets, the things I do well as a mediocre artist look even better, and the things I do poorly look really, really strange. So yeah, I still think it's really, really critical to have that human expertise in order to get the best effect from it.
thank you for watching and let you know about a dream that I have. You see, I want to grow this podcast to be the biggest and best game dev podcast in the whole world. I'm tracking down the likes of Thomas Brush and Aramis and trying to reach their level. And you can help me by hitting the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube or leaving a review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. You can help me achieve that dream. Thanks for watching and thanks for considering helping me out. All right, let's get you back to the episode. Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. One thing I'm curious to get your take on, something that sparked for me in what you just said. You mentioned, I'll paraphrase what I heard, and you correct me if it's wrong. But
Yeah.
essentially, we're all opposed to AI slop. But if we had valuable AI being used, then mostly we'll be okay with that. And for some reason, the thing that popped in my head is recently we've had this cycle of graduations and graduation speeches and seeing places where a speaker, and this is a weird dynamic of like typically an older speaker mentioning the rise of AI and then getting boos from the younger generation. So do you think that that's still just maybe a part of this same zeitgeist that is anti-AI, or do you think there will always be a portion of people who simply want human-made things?
I think both can be true. I think we're always going to want human made things. I think just our definition of what human made things
Mm,
means shifts over
okay.
time. Uh, Hilariously, so my game Overtrick, which we'll talk about at some point, is kind of set in the Art Deco era, 1920s America. And you think about all the technological innovations and disruptions that were happening in that period in the world. Um, and it's funny, the art style that I kind of adopted into Overtrick is based on this lithographic printing technique where the printing press
Mm,
and a lot of printing techniques were being re-innovated and kind of putting these artisans out of business, these like artists who hand painted things. But nowadays, if someone like crafted a lithograph and like printed stuff, we would think of that as human made artisan print created. Whereas before that was like,
yeah.
this technology putting people out of business. So um, I think we will always crave a human experience created and driven by other humans. But I think our definition of what counts as being human created is going to shift in this with this new technology.
Yeah, sure. I've heard this argument before in favor of generative AI, and I sort of fluctuate on it. Like
Yeah, I was going to
in the one
ask,
sense, it's
how are
yeah,
you feeling about this?
right, yeah. So like one example is like whenever they made cameras, they the painter felt that this was, some kind of egregious thing, but they're really just two separate art forms, and both can coexist, and that's totally fine. And like you said, we consider even photography as like a human made art, even though it's not. It's all technology. But yeah, I still haven't decided. I sort of fluctuate back and forth on agreeing if AI is like that and it's just sort of this new frontier, or if it is different in that it's the thing about AI that I'm really working through is like it's only derivative. It can't create something new. And maybe with our inputs it can. Like, it's all this is a nuanced conversation. Like our inputs take a bunch of old stuff, and another kind of argument in there with AI is that any book you've ever read, even from a human author, is still derivative of other works. And so, yeah, just parsing all that through, I certainly haven't made a decision, so to speak, but it's definitely a valuable tool, for sure. So, yeah, it's really interesting to think about. So, did you
Yeah,
ever have any of those sort of wanderings, or are you just kind of an early adopter kind of mindset person to be more on the pro generative AI side?
I would say I'm somewhat of an early adopter, but I definitely had a lot of moments of fear and doubt along my journey of like accepting that generative AI was a wonderful tool to be sort of embraced. Um, yeah, I mean, when I first started integrating generative AI into the software I was building a couple of years ago, I mean, it was pretty trippy because it felt like we had to throw out years of work and start completely afresh. And it felt like we were sort of like in this zone of like we've built this business over a couple of years. We had thoughts on what defensibility looked like, and we had to like change all of those thoughts on our corporate strategy and things like that. Um, and then yeah, just I feel like there have been a lot of moments like that. Um, I think when Suno, the generative music system, came out, um, that was really interesting. I'm a classically trained cellist, and so music is, something I've done since childhood and continue to enjoy. And so to see an AI creating this music at a level that even professionals would probably struggle to do, at least in that amount of time, was quite stunning and a little bit scary in some ways. Um, yeah, so it's been interesting to talk to my music friends and see what they feel about that and how many of them are not very excited about it and others are a little bit more excited about it.
Yeah, take me into this decision for you not to use any AI on Overtrick. If is that just a matter of kind of recognizing the vitriol against it in the gamer community right now, or where does that decision come from?
Yeah, there were a couple parts to that decision. One part was certainly the vitriol. I was like, I'm building a card game, basically trick taking card game, roguelike. And this is not the kind of game that requires a massive amount of art or a super complex like netcode system or server or something like that. So it is something that can be built without generative AI. And, you know, I could just avoid the vitriol entirely by doing that. I think the other big part of it, though, was I'm constantly optimizing for learning. And I do feel like using generative AI damages your learning curve quite a bit. And so I didn't want to use generative AI as I was becoming more and more familiar with the game engine that I use, Godot. And then also as I was finding like what the art style I wanted it to have. And I've always wanted to, I love music and I love composing music. I just haven't had a chance to, there's not much room in a startup in the legal tech space to compose a jingle or something like that. So I just wanted to do that by hand essentially. And so, yeah, those two combinations, this desire to avoid the vitriol and this desire to learn and therefore avoid using generative AI kind of came together.
Yeah, I saw a post recently, and this was more in the software industry, but they were proposing that junior programmers shouldn't get to use AI at all, but that the higher level you are, the more you can use it because you have more of an understanding of what's, what's needed and how to interact with it. So this is an interesting thought also, yeah, of like kind of not allowing it to stunt some of your growth, so to speak. But then maybe the more you know, the more it can be helpful. That's certainly an interesting kind of angle that I've been thinking about as well. Now, one question you actually wanted me to bring up because you feel like you have some value here is uh, for someone that's early in their career, what are the skill trees that you think people should be investing in? And what are some that maybe aren't as applicable because of the rise of AI?
Yeah. I mean, I think we already sort of covered it a bit. If we're optimizing for learning, which I do feel like one should do in the early stage of one's career, maybe avoid generative AI, um, or don't try and learn generative AI as like the first skill. I think of it a little bit as like, it's still worth teaching arithmetic to children, even though they're probably going to be using a calculator quite a bit as an adult. But like having that basis of understanding how arithmetic works, how numbers work, is fundamental to being able to properly use a calculator and then go beyond that. Um, so I think the same is true. Whatever discipline is calling to you, whether it's programming, like learn to code, learn what good software looks like, learn what good software principles are. I can't speak as strongly towards art, but I think the same thing is absolutely true. Learn learn good principles of art, learn good principles of composition, and that'll help you um, understand how to multiply your skill set with generative AI. I think a
Yeah,
funny story I heard recently from a friend of mine who's a programmer who uses a lot of generative AI in his coding. He was saying, I'll like tell it to do something and it'll do this thing. I'll look at it and I'll be like, that's wrong. So then I'll ask it, what did I tell you to do? And it'll tell me what I told it to do. And then what did you do? And it'll be like, oh, I did this instead. It's like, see what you did wrong there? And then it will fix it. But like, if you don't have my friend's expertise in programming, you can't necessarily recognize that that first answer was like totally wrong. And you won't then have the ability to coax it into giving you a good answer. Um, so I think if you're early stage in your career, I think it's scary, but I think still investing in what you would have invested in pre-generative AI is a good idea, because those principles, those skill sets, the expertise and recognition that will allow you to have is going to be really, really important, even in a world where generative AI is everywhere and everyone's using it.
Yeah, I love that analogy of, learning math without the calculator. I think that's really apt here. This is maybe a good time to kind of transition into some of your other background and why maybe you're a good person to have this conversation with. But can you tell me about founding Ironclad and what that company is or was?
Yeah. Yeah. So before starting my game dev journey, I started a company called Ironclad. We started in 2014, so about 12 years ago. And at first it was just me and my co-founder, Jason. Jason was a lawyer. Um, I was a software engineer. We decided to work on building AI for legal contracts. Um, we built the company up over a decade, from just the two of us to when I left, it was 600 employees. I think now we're up to 700 employees, from zero customers to 2,000, over 2,000 customers. I think recently, and a lot of like big multinational corporations in there. So yeah, absolutely incredible journey. If you've ever watched the show Silicon Valley, I feel like I lived. No, it's kind of
Yeah,
hilarious.
I haven't caught that one.
It was a hilarious show on HBO, and yeah, it was hilarious in ways that were actually kind of sad if you were going through the actual startup
Sure.
journey.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I learned so much, over 11 years of working on Ironclad. Met so many amazing people, had so many amazing life experiences. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. Congrats on all the success in that endeavor. What do you think is harder, game dev or SaaS?
Um, there's so many dimensions for this question. The easiest one is like in terms of making money, I think game dev is way harder.
Mm,
But I think on a lot of game dev is hard. Don't get me wrong. I think on almost all dimensions, starting a VC backed company, whether in SaaS or consumer or elsewhere, it is really, really, really difficult. I cannot stress how like psychologically taxing spending over a decade working on a company, starting a company is. And maybe just to, you know, illustrate the point, when I left Ironclad last October, I think I pretty much immediately lost over 10 pounds. Got my first like
wow.
clean bill of health from the doctor. Uh, and I didn't even realize the latent stress that, thinking about a startup idea all day, every day, nights and weekends, uh, what kind of toll it put on your body. But I definitely recognized it after the fact. Um, but yeah, the highs were the highs have been really, really high, but the lows were definitely super low. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think game dev is a little bit easier than starting a company. Although I will say, having a kid may be even harder than both of those. So becoming a new
Yeah, that
parent.
that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything do you think that the at least the indie dev community could steal from the startup kind of mindset or community?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been asked for advice on starting a company, and I've received a lot of advice on starting a company. And I think a lot of that advice has been super relevant in game development. Um, the one piece of advice I always give people who are thinking about starting a company, and that I think is really relevant to indie game dev, is to enjoy the journey. I'm always like, take lots of pictures, um, and just like try to enjoy the journey, as stressful as it is. Um, and I think it's because if you're just, the outcome is very uncertain. If you're starting a company, you hope that you have like a great outcome financially. If you're building a game, you hope that you have a great outcome, but like financially, it's almost certainly not going to be a great outcome. So if you're in it for the outcome, well, if you're in game dev, you're in the wrong industry. Honestly, if you're in startups, you're probably in the wrong industry if you are looking to make, a lot of money. But if you're doing it because you want to enjoy the journey, because you're passionate about it, then you're doing it for the right reasons. And you may as well enjoy the journey because the destination probably isn't going to be exactly what you expect. So yeah, take a lot of pictures along the way, enjoy the journey. I think on top of that, asking for help, and always having a beginner mindset about things is super, super helpful. Um, we like to talk about surrounding yourself with success, like success breeds success. And I think the same is true in indie game dev. Like, don't shun people because you think you're better than them, or you see their success and you don't think it's well deserved. Like, you have so much you can learn from them, and keep that open mindset instead. Um, and then the third one I think is relentless optimism. Like, always hope that the thing that you're working on is going to be the thing that catapults your game into success. And honestly, that's part of why I love your podcast. Like, I think you said you started it because you wanted to like create inspiration and motivation for yourself. And I think that's really, really critical. Keeping a good mindset about things and staying hopeful, despite all the setbacks and despite oftentimes feeling like you're screaming into the void and no one cares. Um, I think having that irrational hope and relentless optimism is super important. So thank you for doing this podcast because I think it's really, really valuable to people out there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I love that idea of relentless motivation or which one did you say? Motivation or
I said
optimism?
optimism. Yeah,
Optimism. No,
yeah.
I like that even more. Relentless optimism. Yeah, I do feel like that's sort of a core tenet of the Dev Dream podcast is like, I was talking to a buddy the other day and I was like, yeah, I emailed Brandon Sanderson and asked him to come on the podcast. And it's just like,
Nice.
why not? He will certainly never read that or look at it, but why not? Like, why
Or
not
maybe he
dream?
will.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there were a lot of other people that have come on the pod that I'm like, they're never coming, but why not email them? So, yeah, that relentless optimism to just kind of say, what if? I really like that, especially in game dev, which has so many opportunities for lows, and like you said, could be like screaming into the void. And for any Brandon Sanderson fans out there, the message is always journey before destination. I don't know if you're a fan of him,
I
Kai,
am.
but
I am. Yeah.
yeah, that okay. This is tracking of how you got to those words specifically, but yeah, fantastic message. Love that. And then on the flip side, that question I was asking you, what game devs can learn. Is there anything that you've learned from the game dev community that you don't think you could have gotten from the startup community?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there are so many similarities between startups and game dev, but I think at the end of the day, um, at least in my view, games are art and startups are businesses. And so there's just, these are two different worlds, the world of art and the world of business. Um, and I think there are a lot of corollaries that sort of like fall out of that. Um, one being like, what does success look like? I think for game development, success is realizing the artistic vision, right? Like the right choice in a business is probably whatever is going to be the right choice for the bottom line of the business. Um, and the mission is in service to like staying alive as a business. Whereas in game, I think you might make a choice that actually reduces the number of players and therefore the TAM of your game, in pursuit of realizing that vision, that artistic vision that you have in your head. And maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. But uh, yeah, I think they're very very different. Um, yeah, I think another big way that this manifests is minimum viable products for games are just much the bar for a minimum viable product is much higher than it is in the startup world, which makes iteration and iterating on a good product very different, much more difficult in many ways.
Yeah, well, you clearly have a great appreciation for the game dev community, which is awesome. And you mentioned you had a super successful company, and now you're sort of transitioning to making games. So, how did that switch come about? Why are you kind of joining this game dev journey?
Yeah. I mean, I have wanted to build a game basically my entire life. I think a lot of my hobbies and passions sort of have built towards being able to build a video game. Um, I started programming because I wanted to build a game. I started drawing comics when I was a kid and composing music because these all felt like things that needed to happen in order to make a game. Um, so yeah, that's that's why I decided, leaving this over a decade of my life work on Ironclad, and the natural thing to do if I have a moment to is build a game and realize that dream from a childhood.
Yeah, and I imagine you started this journey with a fair bit of confidence coming from so much success in the startup world. But was there any part of game dev that you sort of underestimated in either the difficulty or maybe even the satisfaction or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, game dev has been super challenging for on like every dimension. I think the thing I underestimated the most is probably how saturated the game market is right now. There are just a lot of games that are being released every single day, and there are a lot of like terrible games that probably shouldn't be played. But there are a huge number of really fantastic games that I don't think are going to get the recognition or player base that they deserve. Um, so yeah, that's something that I definitely severely underestimated. Yeah.
Yeah, anything you're doing to try to solve for that problem with your game?
Yeah, lots of things, but Are any of them working? Unclear. I mean,
Sure.
I think at the the main thing I think is just trying to seek out communities that are going to and really engage with communities that are going to like Overtrick. In particular, I've found a lot of resonance with the bridge playing community. So Overtrick is in part based on the classic card game of bridge. And so back in November last year, there was a bridge national championship held in San Francisco, where I live. And I went to the convention center and hung out with a bunch of people playing bridge and got to know these bridge YouTubers and streamers
That's awesome.
personally, and told them about the game and got to know what the different communities were there. And um, so yeah, I would say that's one thing, is just over investing in the communities that are potentially going to really enjoy your game, because they'll certainly give back tenfold what you put in.
Yeah, I think this is a great time to start talking about your game Overtrick. So you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but just to sort of reset the conversation, can you give us the elevator pitch for Overtrick? What is this game?
Yes. Overtrick is a trick taking roguelike. And so if you've played classic card games like Bridge or Euchre or Hearts, Spades, imagine that kind of game mixed with the Balatro, like crazy Joker multipliers and things like that. Um, so yeah, I'm interested. I feel like everyone has this like classic card game that their family used to play, or grandparents taught them or something. Do you have a card game?
Yeah,
Any?
for me, it's euchre. My
Yeah,
family doesn't play any card games, but I actually worked at a tennis camp up in Wisconsin one summer, fell in love with the game of euchre. They taught it to me. And then when I eventually started to date my wife, her family goes crazy for it, like massive euchre tournaments at Christmas. And so yeah, euchre is the game of choice for me. Big fan of euchre.
nice, nice. Yeah, I mean, Overchick honestly feels a lot more like Euchre in many ways than Bridge, because it has the reduced deck of cards, just to make the pacing a little bit faster.
Sure.
No left and right bowers, no screwing the dealer or anything like that. But a lot of elements of Euchre. Um, yeah.
Yeah, where did the inspiration for this game come? I mean, you can start anywhere in the game dev industry, but how did you land here?
Yeah, I mean, so the card game for me growing up was Bridge. I just got obsessed with it. My family loves to play it. But the um, you know, around the time I left Ironclad, I also had we had our first baby, and so I was um, I was kind of like two things going on here. One was I had my family coming to visit to help us take care of this newborn. And I was reminded about Bridge and how much I loved playing it. And then my aunt in particular was like a avid Bridge player, and remains active in like Bridge clubs. So I was like, oh, maybe I should, she's not going to be able to go to her Bridge club while she's across the country, helping us take care of our newborn. Maybe I should build a game for her. And sure enough, I prototyped this Bridge meets Balatro game, and she got obsessed with it. And I found myself again solely responsible for taking care of our newborn because she was just on my computer playing this game.
Oh no.
Um,
You've
yeah,
duped yourself.
exactly. Screwed myself over there. But yeah, the same thing happened to my dad came to visit, and he got obsessed with the game. Um, and so that's how it started, was just, you know, being reminded of playing Bridge and then wanting to give that experience to my family. Um, and then yeah, got just realized soon after coming back from Pat leave that I was actually probably going to move on from the company, and decided, yeah, this is a fun game. I really enjoy playing it, even though I've played many hours, and even though it's in a very unpolished state. Let me see how far I could take this, and so decided to take it to the next level.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I mean, even just the early validation of a couple family members being interested in continually playing in a low polished state, like that is something. And so that's really interesting. I'm always curious to kind of learn about some of the development movings of the game. Have there been any features that you decided to cut that just didn't quite fit the game?
So many features. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the equivalent of Balattra's Jokers in Overtrick are these special ability cards. And I've probably cut at least half of the special ability cards. I've
Oh,
like built
interesting. Yeah.
them, play tested them, been like, this just isn't fun. So yeah. And then there are all these like full features that I got to a point where I could like play test or have others play test and just realized they weren't working. Like, you used to be able to add special abilities to the aces and kings and queens in the deck, but it was just super confusing for anyone except for me. So cut all of that. Um, so yeah, lots of features. Probably built more features that I've cut than features that have stayed in the game.
Yeah, and then in the early stage of this game, did you do a bunch of prototypes? Was this just kind of the game you landed on? Did you do game jams? Like kind of what was the journey to actually get to this game as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I started restarted building games about 2 years ago. I got targeted by some YouTube shorts, and it's just like Godot, the open source game engine. I was like, oh, that seems really really cool. And then I got hit by jury duty, and actually got
Ooh.
into the jury selection process. So there was a lot of waiting around, and I built my first game in like the lobby of or
Oh,
the
that's
waiting
cool.
room of the courthouse.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, so it was super fun, and that then it just became a hobby. So by the time I prototyped Overtrick, I'd probably built like 4 or 5 games and participated in like 1 or 2 game jams. Um, so yeah, and in terms of like the process for deciding that Overtrick was the one, um, it was more just it was the one that I was obsessed with at that particular moment. I was feeling a lot of excitement and validation from like my family was playing it every single day. Like I had the prototype on itch and I
Very
could see
cool.
them logging in every day and playing it. I couldn't see anyone else getting into it, but they were certainly
Sure.
daily active users. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what's been the hardest design decision that you've had to make with Overtrick so far?
Yeah. There have been a lot of yeah, it turns out this genre is maybe a little bit difficult to build in, but I think the design decision that stands out immediately is the art direction decision that I made. Um, the prototype that my family was playing was kind of this classic pixel art style. So all of it looked like Balatro or um, any of these other pixel card games or pixel games. And I decided to take it in a very different direction because when I decided I wanted to, you know, go full time on this, uh, I realized that it was going to be really hard to like market. There was no like visual hook. Pixel cards are just not very interesting for someone to click on. And so I wanted actual human players and characters. And so found inspiration in the Art Deco period and in these like French fashion plates, these fashion magazines from the 1920s. Um, and yeah, decided to go all in on that and completely shift the art style to this like way, way different one, trying to make it look different. And honestly, at first, it looked like a terrible, terrible idea. May still have been a terrible idea. Um, in the vein of like asking for help, I was getting help from a game marketing consultant who was absolutely fantastic. I learned so much from her, but one of the pieces of advice she gave me was like, maybe you should go back to the pixel art style. It's just what people expect from this kind of game, and people will be more forgiving about the edges because right now, like with this Art Deco elevated art style you've got, it makes the it makes just the edges of it feel a lot worse than if it were just a pixel art style. Um, and I was like, I hear you, but I'm gonna go in this direction. The artistic vision thing.
Sure.
Um, yeah, and similarly, another longtime friend of a friend in the game industry. Um, was like, you're a programmer by nature. You're not an art, like a mediocre artist at best. So here are some like ideas that you could use your programming skills to have a wedge to make Overtrick more successful. And perhaps I should have taken one of those directions, but I ended up sticking to the Art Deco style, and that definitely sticks out as like one of probably the bigger decisions that I ended up making with wider
Sure,
implications.
sure. Yeah. Well, at minimum, you'll be pushing your art skills to the test, and there's something to be said about that as well. Something interesting you said there was that maybe this is a challenging genre. How would you define the genre? Is it a trick taking deck builder, or what would you say is the genre? Is that it?
Yeah, trick taking deck builder. That is
Okay. Yeah.
exactly it. Uh, but yeah, there are so many cool trick taking card games. Not like video games, like
Uh-huh.
you play with people in person
Right.
with physical cards. And I'm surprised because I think Overtrick is maybe the first trick taking like deck builder roguelike video game. Um, and I would love to see more of them because I think there's a lot of like cool ideas from the tabletop real life kind of area. But yeah, there are definitely some difficulties like trick taking carries a lot of cognitive load, and you've played euchre, probably know counting the trumps, counting the cards is just it's a lot to keep in mind, and so I've had to make a lot of adjustments to Overtrick to reduce the cognitive load. Initially, a lot of the abilities you had to actively play, but I realized that players, especially new players, were just ignoring all the special abilities and basically just playing
Sure.
like the trick taking part of euchre or bridge. And so I switched to a lot of passive abilities so that players trigger these maybe accidentally at first, but then they start to like learn, oh, cool, if I play in this way, then I'll trigger this ability more. And it starts to become a different game. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of what you said about there just not being a lot of games like this. Yeah, as a euchre enjoyer, that was one of my first thoughts when I kind of, took a look at Overtrick. And it's just that, yeah, trick taking in particular hasn't really made a jump to the video game community. And I don't know if that's because the games have all just fallen really flat because it doesn't quite translate, or if people just haven't really made that jump yet. Um, have you given any thought to, other than the cognitive load, how you can make a good trick taking deck builder? Because the other element that's unique and interesting here is that with the trick taking games and physical cards, you're just playing with a deck of cards, and so adding this element of randomness and power ups. Yeah, how has that journey been? What's that been like trying to solve those two mediums together?
It's been super fun, honestly. I do. I've played, I don't know how many hours of Overtrick I've played, but it is like way, way up there. And I still get a rush when I get a good build. Um, and I've had to do a lot of play testing myself to get it to this point. So I think one of the reasons maybe that this isn't as common of a genre is because it is technically very difficult to pull off. Like it looks very simple, but on the programming side, you basically need to build a gameplay AI system that can play euchre. um, and like theoretically, this is a solved problem. But like I do think that a lot of indie game devs like don't want to invest the time in just building this system that no one will ever really see. And it's hard to debug because you just have this feeling like it made a bad play, but like, was it that you're not good at playing? Or so um, I think it's really tricky to build the AI system that can play the game. Actually, Local Thunk, the Balatro creator, in his blog, he says one of the inspirations for the game was actually this game. I forget if he calls it Big Two or I knew it as Chinese poker as a kid. It's another trick taking game. And he said he remembered playing this trick taking game or Shutter with his friends. And he sort of initially wanted to build that, but it was like programmatically a little bit too hard. So he pivoted into this like different type of game. And yeah, so I think building a good enough AI to make this game fun is a bit of a hurdle for a lot of game developers, would be my guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hope you're able to put it all together. And, there's a lot of stories of people that they really fell in love with their game and then it did well. So I'm sure there's stories where people fell in love with their game and then it didn't do well also. But, it's just another good sign if you love the game that, yeah, maybe you've really got something special here. So that's really exciting. I would like to spend a little bit of time thinking just about kind of your mindset as a game dev. And one thing in particular you mentioned that I kind of wanted to ask you about was you mentioned just keeping the mindset of a beginner. What did you actually mean by that?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think it's easy to fall back on things that you feel like you know really, really well and just like double down there. um, think about things that you're good at and only do those things and not do the other things. And so I think for game dev, it's really, really important to keep a beginner mindset, to really look at things not just from first principles, but also like look for the advice from people like all of the wonderful guests you have on your podcast, or Chris Zukowski or Jonas Tyroler, or people like this. And so having that beginner mindset, I think, is really critical to me to entering any space, but certainly the game dev space. Um, I think for me, honestly, that beginner mindset was also a source of comfort and solace. Uh, if you ever have a baby, then you might experience what I experienced, which is a lot of sleepless nights holding the screaming child and really just sort of wanting to dissociate. And, parenting is really tough. Like shout out to all the parents out there. But one of the things that kept me sane through those early years or early months, we're just past the first year mark, was actually learning about game dev. I listened to so many GDC talks. I listened to a bunch of podcasts, Aramis and Thomas Stewart and Jonas Tyroler and DevDuck, and all of those podcasts kind of kept me sane and learning even while I was doing this like pretty brutal try to get your baby to sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. I haven't had a kid yet, but there were definitely, especially when I first found game dev, it was a harder season of life. Like, my mental state was not very good. My job was horrible, and having that sort of endless frontier of learning and people to look up to, and even just dreams, like kind of back to the theme of this podcast, like having those dreams actually can be a comfort. Maybe it's a crutch at times, but sometimes you need a crutch for a little bit, and so I resonate with that a lot. That's a very cool part of the game dev community and the resources we have and the ways we can connect with people. So that makes a lot of sense. Also in those early days, you had so much experience coming from SaaS. Did you also have times where game dev felt impossible, or was it a pretty easy transition for you?
Certainly there were moments that felt impossible. But like, I think the thing that I've been successful in reminding myself constantly is like, we're creating fun. I think Chris Zukowski says this a lot. Like building games is a privilege. Like you are creating a fun experience for yourself and other people. And so if you're creating fun, like you can and should have fun creating fun. Um, so yeah, going back to, Brandon Sanderson and enjoying the journey and having it not be about the destination. Really, really try to enjoy enjoy the process. Um, but yeah, there have absolutely been times that feel impossible, and I think especially around marketing, I see a lot of talk about this and discussion about this. Marketing often feels just impossible. Feels like you're shouting into an oversaturated market. Feels like no one cares about this thing. This thing you put so much of your life and mental effort into. Um, specifically for me, I remember making the trailer for Overtrick and just feeling like I couldn't get the motivation to do anything. It was like right after I decided to work on the game full time, and for just like a week and a half, I did nothing because every day I'd be like, what's the highest priority? Game trailer. Where's my motivation to make the game trailer? It is non-existent. And I just like stare at my screen and watch YouTube videos of game developers. And yeah,
Yeah, how did you eventually get out of that funk? Did you pivot to something else? Did you power through? What got you through that moment when you were stuck on motivation with the trailer?
a little bit of powering through, honestly, and then a slight pivot in mindset, and then a lot of walks in nature. So yeah, a lot of things. The funny thing that ended up sort of helping me get over that hump was I decided to build the trailer in engine. And so I think part of it was I was worried because I knew the game was going to change so much that I felt really weird about putting all this work into like capturing a bunch of gameplay and then putting it into a trailer. And then like 2 weeks from now, having the game look so much better than the trailer. And so I actually used Godot to script every scene in the trailer using the actual gameplay logic and gameplay UI. And that allowed me to actually just hit export on the trailer and have a new version of the trailer with updated gameplay and graphics, but the exact same beats and music and things like that. So um, and that's what ended up getting me over the hump.
Okay, yeah, that's really clever. And then something that's interesting to me is I assumed, you coming from building this company to massive successes that the maybe sort of biz dev side, mostly thinking about marketing, would have come more natural to you. But it seems like that's also been just a really tough piece. Do you think it's mostly just the oversaturation that you've also already mentioned, or is there anything else to that? Whenever I, kind of phrase that sentence that way.
Yeah, I think marketing is always hard. Getting people to care is always hard. And so, I certainly, there are some like things I learned uh, from starting my own company and all the fantastic marketers that I worked with at that company. Um, so maybe the main thing that I learned from them is it's not easy. You can have a great product, you can have everything seemingly going for you, and it still takes a huge amount of effort and ingenuity to get anyone to care. So yeah.
Yeah, where are you at in Overtrick's journey? Do you have a release date, and how long have you been kind of working on it and doing marketing for it and stuff? What's the timeline been?
Yeah. I basically started working on Overtrick full time in October and I've had a prototype and gameplay and a good sense for the game already. And so I think I put the Steam page up very soon after that, like end of October, maybe early November, and then the demo soon after that. Did Steam Next Fest in February. And here's maybe some interesting background. After seeing Next Fest, I actually planned to release the game. I didn't think that I was getting much signal on the game being particularly interesting to players. And so but I did feel like I could get into a place where I felt proud of what I'd done. And I was, again, optimizing for learning. But something funny happened. And this goes back to the minimum viable product for a game, just the bar being so much higher than I'm used to. Uh, in polishing the game, to make it ready for Steam Next Fest, and then in polishing the game again to get it ready for release after the Next Fest numbers didn't pan out. I actually got it to a place where it apparently felt really, really good, and players got really excited about it. So much so that a publisher reached out, and after doing some background research on him, I got really excited about working with him. So I announced a release date to my player community, said I'm going to release this at the end of March. Get excited, get ready. And then Graham from Two Left Thumbs reached out that day and was like, "Can you push back the release date?" I was like, "Yeah, why?" And he's like, "Well, like I would love to work with you, but I'm going to need a little bit more time to market this game." So, yeah, I think putting in that polish and bringing it up to a level that made sense. Yeah, the bar was just a lot higher than I anticipated.
Yeah, what a fun twist to the story. I didn't know about this part. That's really interesting. So have you been putting in a lot more work? Are you still continuing development even at this point, or is it more just hitting those marketing beats at this point?
There's still a lot of active development happening. Yeah. Luckily, working with Graham, he's helped a ton. All the marketing beats were yours truly for everything before March. And then Graham has done a ton to do a lot of the marketing beats thereafter, which has been fantastic. Um, I was, I felt like I would have been proud of the version of Overtrick that would have come out at the end of March had Graham not reached out. Um, but having the extra months has absolutely allowed us to create like a much more fully fledged game. And it's been really, really exciting to see the community get excited about all the different things we're teasing about what the full game will have. Yeah.
Yeah, what are some of the things help me understand the things that have been added to the game, like is it mostly polish? Are you adding gameplay modes? What are the things that you're doing to sort of level this up to the bigger game that it will be instead of the version that would have released in March?
Yeah. Um, we are adding a couple of new game modes, as well as new opponents to play against. So the version that would have released in March, I think it's a really fun, solid game. You basically go up against these three increasingly difficult bosses, basically, all have their own abilities. Um, and then if you can beat them, then you are crowned champion of the House of Diamonds. What Graham and Two Left Thumbs allowed us to do in terms of expanding that vision is actually, rather than three opponents, we can increase the number of opponents. We've already added an additional three sets of opponents. And then the core mechanics of the game also allowed for an expansion in how you play the game and how these opponents like appear. So the what would have been the release in March is actually about to be just the demo version that you can play for free because it's a very set track. It's very exciting to play. We know that it is easy to onboard new players onto. Like you don't get completely screwed your first run, but you feel like you can get better and better. And then we are going to be able to introduce additional game modes that create a lot of gameplay variety that force you to really think about how you're building your strategy and how you're going to get to the end of it all. Uh, but maybe would be a little bit much if it were your first experience with the game. Yeah,
Yeah, well, that sounds really exciting, and as a euchre fan myself, I'll be on the lookout, keeping an eye on the game. It sounds really cool.
please do.
Just to
Yeah,
sort of put a bow on this conversation as we near the end here. Let's circle back to marketing. Now that you've done some marketing yourself and you've worked with a publisher and seen some of their marketing beats, if you had one piece of advice for the indie dev listening about marketing, what would you say?
I would say. I mean, for the first time indie dev, which to be clear, I count as. um, I would suggest not being too precious about your first launch. Um, I think there are a lot of gotchas that you can read about and listen to people talk about in terms of marketing a game on Steam. A lot of like buttons that you have to press that actually have much wider implications than they might at first appear to. But I don't think that you can fully learn those lessons without doing it and just doing it. And I think while it's scary to realize that there are all these gotchas that pressing this button might do something that is like very, very surprising and that you can never pull back. I think the thing that probably stops a lot more indie game developers is probably a fear of getting something out there. So I would just maybe listen to a specific marketing thing, more of a general like life advice. Like you've got to get your thing out there. Um, you've got to get your game out there. You've got to make noise about it. Otherwise, no one's going to come and play it.
Yeah, well, this has been a fantastic chat. I've loved getting to meet with you and hear about Overtrick. Before I let
Likewise.
you go, I'd like to end with one final question. So, this is the Dev Dream podcast. Obviously, I made it to inspire myself and others, and I'm always motivated by hearing about the aspirations of other developers. So, for you, Kai, what would you say is your game dev dream in this season of life?
Um, my game dev dream, I think, in this season of life, I am two answers. in one way, I think I'm living the game dev dream. I have had the opportunity and the privilege to work full time on this indie game since October. I've had the opportunity to work with some absolutely wonderful people, including my publisher, Two Left Thumbs, and to build a game that I truly enjoy playing, even though I've played tens of thousands of hours, or maybe not tens of thousands of hours, but many, many, many hours of. I think on the other hand, I continue to dream bigger. This time last year, I think if with everything Overtrick has become, I think I would have said I'd be very, very proud of that outcome. But now I think having gotten here, I just want to go further. I would love Overtrick to make trick-taking card games an exciting thing again, revitalize the Bridge community, maybe have like a knock-on effect on euchre communities and things like that. I would love for it to reach Balatro levels of success. It's unlikely to, and I recognize that, but I do think that part of having a dream is that it's constantly just a little bit further, just a little bit more. So, yeah.
Well, Kai, that's a fantastic dream. I hope you're able to make it a reality. Thanks for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, Blake. Thanks for having me on.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Kai as much as I did, even if we dipped into some controversy with his takes on AI. If you've made it this far, let me know what you thought about this episode, especially about those AI thoughts. Also, if you're looking for more game dev content, I think you'll enjoy this video next.